All right, welcome back, baseball fans, to 1979-82 off-season look, part 2 of the keep, waive, retire analysis. The teams are trying to get set up for a draft in the spring, or actually for the fall league, but they're getting some of the off-season moves done now, so that everybody can comport to 4 keepers, 2 waives, and 2 retires. And we got a look at the worst 8 teams, getting down to, in most cases, the proper 4 keeper, 2 waive, 2 retire. St. Louis is still going to wait a little bit and see what becomes available before they make any moves. So let's pick up where we left off, and we'll go from teams 9 through 16. If you look into the column here, this is the fix column. I'll just write the word fix there. So this is where we started with 151 keepers, 59 waivers, and only 46 retires. And we're down to here now. We're getting close. We got 134 keepers, which means basically only 6 more need to be put on waivers, and then a bunch of guys will have to be moved over into retirement. And that means that they'll probably come out of retirement if they're pretty good. That's good news. Our retirement list is good to have. I mean, it's the same as a waiver list. It's just like an overflow category. But anyway, so teams 9 to 16 are represented right here. This was very fun, by the way. And everybody got the 4 keeper part, and then the waive and retire isn't quite correct yet, but most of the time that is simply something that can be corrected later. Because frankly, it doesn't really matter. As long as you get 8 players, it doesn't really matter how many you can just move waivers to retires through other organizations. Or the only problem would be is if you had too many retired guys. If you had 3, because you can't move a retired into a waivered column. That doesn't seem to be a problem with anybody, really. If you look down here, the entire league, literally the California Angels are the only team that have 3 guys retiring. And they can fix that in one easy trade, probably. But everybody else, they don't only have to worry about too many retired guys. So we're going to begin with Colorado. First thing to note about Colorado is they won the Commissioner Award this season for roster utilization. It's a special award given to the team that utilizes, you look at the most at-bats by the least used hitter, multiply that number by the innings pitched by the least used pitcher, and come up with a factor, and the highest factor wins the Commissioner Award. That grade is given out as soon as the regular season ends before the playoffs, and Colorado won it. Colorado was in a lot of close games this year, so they get a lot of using the bench a lot. So what is a Commissioner Award? Pretty simply, it's the 33rd pick in the draft. It's a compensation pick, just like the NFL does. Of course, the NFL does it in the 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round. This is a nice, expensive compensation pick. It's the 33rd pick in the draft. So basically, the 8th round pick is forfeited and replaced with a 2nd pick at the end of the 1st round. That's how it's equated. So it's a pretty cool value. Colorado is going to have that value going into the draft. Aside from that, they started the math with 403.01 and got to 402.02, but there was a couple trades involved. They didn't just stand pat. We have the 2 separate rosters to look at where you start, where they finished. This is what they started with: Thompson, Ruthven, McWilliams, and Reed. And then they had 3 keepers, or 3 waivers, and then they would end up over here by making a deal, one deal, and we'll show you that one. So we'll go to the carousel here, and we'll pick up where we left off for the last time out. Colorado initially passed, and Boston went on the clock. And Boston traded Louis Tiant back to Cleveland for Dennis Eckersley. And we talked about this, that Eckersley got an extra year in Cleveland with a Boston card. So Boston finally gets Eckersley. Boston decided to keep Tiant an extra year, is the way it worked out. Now Tiant is in a waiver period. He's not that good anymore beginning in 1979, 81. He's getting very old. Eckersley still has some decent years in Boston before that ERA starts to go up. So that would cost the Red Sox 1 token to get a Hall of Famer, even as a starting pitcher when he wasn't noted for that, because Tiant's on waivers. Tiant was an active player, then it would have been a token. And then, after that, Boston, this is where Colorado gets involved. Boston had to clear the deck of a 5th keeper and also keep third base open. They send Butch Hobson as a keeper to Colorado for retired player Rick Auerbach, who we've talked about before, had 2 monster years as an extra player in 1974 and 78. But once those cards are done, he's done. So Butch Hobson will have a nice year in 79. And so the Red Sox get the token back for him. It'll cost Colorado a token to acquire Butch Hobson. This was also done so that Boston can clear third base for the arrival of Wade Boggs. So now Wade Boggs can just plug right into third base. Going back to Colorado, Hobson, he becomes the keeper, replacing, I think, Auerbach, who was moved from a keeper to waivers and then traded. So Hobson, Jason Thompson, good power for a Rocky team that likes power. Larry McWilliams is actually a very good quality pitcher that the Pirates are going to want to get by 83, 84. And Ron Reed, who's like a lifetime Colorado Rocky, and they comport to 402 too. Next, of course, is those Red Sox, starting at 502.01, and they made a few deals. Let's show you where they started. You saw one of them. Fisk, Hobson, Rice, Tiant, and Stanley. They finally realized that Tiant isn't worth being a keeper, so that was part of the transactions. And the new look Red Sox, at this point, they got Dennis Eckersley, and that was really their only move, because the guy they got in the Colorado trade was the one retired guy they needed. So they have Fisk, Rice, Eckersley, and Bob Stanley. So those are good Red Sox players, the 4. Waiving John Tamargo, the World Series hero of 2 years ago, and John Curtis. Retiring Rick Auerbach, who never played for the Red Sox, or Randy Moffett, who didn't either. So that's pretty traditional and straightforward for Boston. They could probably stop if they wanted to. And you see that Colorado and Boston are at 402.02. Next up are the Giants, and after the Giants are the Cincinnati Reds. And this is interesting because they would be making a deal. Interesting deal, too. San Francisco is already involved in a trade. Let's just go down to them first. We talked. They acquired Ed Whitson the last time we convened. They got Ed Whitson. And then in the second move is they traded a keeper. Each team's second basemen were traded for each other as keepers. And here it is. The Giants trade Bump Wills to the Reds for Joe Morgan. Now, you're thinking, Joe Morgan? Well, guess what, folks? Joe Morgan starts to turn into a little bit of a pumpkin here. He really has a pretty lame 79. He's with Houston in 80. But in 1982, he was a pretty good year for the San Francisco Giants. And that is a nice card that the Giants are going to get. Bump Wills has a decent 79 and 80 card. I think a 79, 80, and an 81 card. All 3 of those years are good. But because Joe Morgan's a Hall of Famer, the Giants got to fork up a token. I know Morgan's past his prime, but it's still Joe Morgan. And for Bump Wills, and on paper it doesn't look very good, does it? So that's why the Reds do get a token for losing Joe Morgan. And this would be the final trade of the Joe Morgan era in Strat, because we had him in Houston, Cincinnati. We're skipping the second appearance on Houston, which was in 1980 when he helped those Houston Astros win that division. That's a nice story. 1980 Houston Astros winning the National League West. But frankly, Houston has Dickie Thon, who's a better second baseman. So they don't really need Joe Morgan. Another trade the Reds would make, just to make this, to gain something, is they traded a DH outfield type on waivers, Jerry Turner, for Lee Lacy. But Lacy actually turns out, instead of being like a utility player, he actually turns out to be a everyday regular for the Pirates. This would be a token move, so that token the Reds got, they end up sending it to Cleveland to get Lee Lacy. One of the reasons this is such a clever trade for the Reds is that it keeps Lee Lacy away from the Pittsburgh Pirates. So that is a smart move, jumping on that, because frankly, the Pirates had no room for Lee Lacy in this offseason because Dave Parker and Willie Stargell and Rick Rhoden and I think one of the pitchers, Jim Bibby, their contracts are all up at the same time, so they can't jump on a free agent like Lee Lacy. So that's an unfortunate bit of news for the Pirates, because you have to think the Reds are probably going to hold on to Lacy. And actually, when you think about it, in the early 1980s, when you look at the Red outfield, I mean, they had like Eddie Milner and Paul Householder and some other guys. And they went after an aging Cesar Cedeno, I believe, also. Lee Lacy has some good juice all the way to 1984. I should have made this a 2-token trade, but I just made it a 1-token trade. So it's the Reds doing some smart stuff. They lost arguably their best player of the 1970s. Well, exclusively of the 70s, because you have to add the 60s in for Pete Rose and Johnny Bench. But, so yeah, Lee Lacy. Plus, Lee Lacy can even play second base for a year, I believe. All right, enough of that. So the Giants and the Reds, the first 4 teams are all at the proper number, 40202, and they're all feeling pretty happy. Colorado, Boston, San Francisco, and Cincinnati. Texas is at 40400. We can take a look at that. They didn't make a move either, because again, it's not that important to. They can just retire 2 of the guys they have on waivers because they like their keepers. Let's take a look at the Texas Rangers keepers here. Bobby Bonds, who they made a trade for in the previous video. John Matlack, and really good pitchers. John Matlack, Fergie Jenkins, and Doc Medich. So 3/4 of their pitching staff, plus Steve Comer will come back for 1 more year. That's some good starting rotation, plus you're adding Bonds. And frankly, these 4 waivered guys, Bochy, Mike Edwards, Mary Guerrero, and Jim Beattie, I could simply retire any of these guys if I really wanted to. They're currently on waivers, but I really doubt anybody will want to trade from them and make them a keeper. So for now, Texas will stand pat. Next up, Florida. They made 1 deal. They had too many keepers. And frankly, they didn't make a deal. What they did was they moved Pat Kelly, was a keeper. They put him on waivers. He has 1 more good year left in 79, but it's doubtful anyone will trade for that year. So they just slid him into the waiver pile, and that just made the math perfect. This is what it looked like before at 50102, and then they said, let's put him on waivers, and you got the perfect math. Simple fix. That's what Florida did. They could still make deals. Once we find out who all the guys who are on waivers are, that could make a big change. So we've got 2 more to do. Minnesota, they were very active, and Seattle. 2 very active teams here. And you see there's a bunch of tokens coming up. Minnesota started this process at 50201. Eventually they went up to 6, and now they're down to 40301. So they just have to move a guy from waivers to retirement. But they changed their roster nicely here. Let's look at some more Minnesota moves. They had Burt Blyleven, and they were looking for a taker. And we saw that they sent him to. Oh, you see it right here. They sent him to Cleveland. Burt Blyleven is his choice of teams. the Pirates, the Indians. He's even played in another version of this on one of the expansion teams, Portland. Blyleven's a perfect candidate, really, to go to an expansion team because he bounced around his career. Any bounce around player is a perfect candidate for an expansion team, because an expansion team is going to always want to keep that guy because he's got a long career. And you're not too concerned of stealing Blyleven from his lifelong team because he doesn't have a lifelong team. So that's how you see a lot of guys like that. But in this particular case, Cleveland gets him, and he had a nice little run for them in the early 80s. Rick Waits, they were going to be a keeper, but then, we looked at the numbers closely, and he's not very good after 78. He plays every year, but he's really not worth being a keeper. You could probably get him off the waiver list and bring him back to Cleveland if you want. But Rick Waits is going to move around in this a little longer as part of deals. The Twins get a token from the Cleveland because Blyleven's a Hall of Famer and he's got a long shelf life. He's got a lot more good years. So the Twins get a token for moving on Blyleven. Finally moving on Blyleven. They moved on Blyleven in 75, 76. So they had him for an extra 2-3 years. So it's about time. The next move, Yankees in Seattle are coming up here. First move, we have Yankees in Cleveland. And this one, Cleveland needed a starting pitcher, and they got Sorensen for Rick Waits. Let me make sure we got that right here. Was it the Yankees in Cleveland? Because Waits just went to Minnesota. I'm sorry, this is Minnesota, right? Sorensen goes to the Twins, who acquired Rick Waits up here. And then they sent Waits to the Yankees, and the Yankees are going to put him on waivers. Let me just confirm the Yankees, just to make sure, he should be on the Yankees on waivers. Yeah, Waits on, okay. I just had the wrong name written here, yeah. So Waits ends up going to the Yankees in a deal. They're still going to put him on waivers. Sorensen has like a year or so left, and he was a Brewer, but he'll go to a Brewer division rival, in this case the Twins. Now, there was no tokens involved in this, because looking at the stats closely, Sorensen's only slightly better than Rick Waits, so it wasn't really worth a full token in that. And then the next move, we can skip this. This is from last year. All right, so we have a big move between the Yankees and Seattle. This is a great trade. The Yankees are going to trade Frank Tavares as a keeper, and Ed Figueroa, who they decided to put on waivers because he only has one more good year left, to Seattle for Bucky Dent and Rich Gossage, who of course would be Yankees anyway. So yeah, the Yankees do get their guys finally, who were misplaced on different teams in the last season. Again, the Yankees are still trying to win a World Series. They haven't done anything in this timeline. Boston won the World Series 2 years ago. Well, now 3 years ago, since the Dodgers just won the World Series. So the Yankees got nothing out of the 76 roster, the 77 or 78 roster. They have two more playoff rosters in this timeline, the 80 and the 81. They've gotten nothing out of that. So now they made the trade to get Bucky Dent and Rich Gossage, but it's 2 tokens. And that is because Gossage is a Hall of Famer. Plus, it's also 2 active players. Plus, Gossage is so good for the Yankees in this period. Tavares is okay. He actually would play for the Mets, I think, after he leaves the Pirates. And yeah, so it's a 2-token move. I never go beyond a 2-token move and say maybe there should be 3 tokens. I don't find that to be an attractive option. And then Seattle isn't done yet. After getting these 2 juicy tokens, they send John D'Acquisto to Cleveland for Gaylord Perry, who has one more good year left in him. One more good year left in him. Because he's got one more good year left in him and he's a Hall of Famer, it would cost Seattle one of those tokens they just used up here. But let's take a look at the Yankees in Seattle now. Let's look at the Twins, Yankees in Seattle. Start with the Twins. The Twins now are keeping Rod Carew because California's keeping Rod Jackson. So that's a pretty cool deal. What if Rod Carew stayed with the Twins? We're going to find out. He's going to stick around Minnesota, which is a great thing for the Twins. Plus, the Twins and the Angels are in different divisions. And again, Ron Jackson's 82 California card, it's like 330. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense to trade Rod Carew to a team with Ron Jackson, and yeah, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. So we just leave them alone where they're at. So Sorensen will get a starting spot. They have Kuzman from last year. Dave Goltz has one more good year left in 79. So that's 3 good starting pitchers. They have Mike Marshall going to the bullpen with Doug Corbett and John Henry Johnson, and then they can move Arroyo or Cott, either guy, into the rotation. That is a good pitching staff. They had Bob Randall and Bumper Rivera as keepers, and obviously nobody wanted them, so they moved on to waivers. And so we looked at Colorado, Boston, San Francisco, Cincinnati, Texas, Florida, Minnesota. Let's take a look at Seattle. And we could look at the Yankees next time too, because they're not even, they were part of the trade. Well, they haven't actually finished making their moves yet anyway. Spoiler alert, the Yankees do have 4 keepers. We'll look at the Yankees, why not? Who cares? Let's do Seattle first though. Seattle started at 3-0-3-0-2, and some pretty cool moves for the Seattle Mariners, who aren't known for doing much in this timeline. Pretty cool that they traded for Gaylord Perry, who actually plays for Seattle in 82. But they're going to have Perry with 1 good year, along with Bannister and Parrott. Glenn Abbott, not so much, but that's their 4-man rotation there. They got Splittorff. So you could put Abbott in the pen. That was the next trade here, I forgot to mention. And the final trade of the night, Seattle trades Darryl Knowles, who goes on waivers, to Kansas City for Paul Splittorff. And why did the Royals go to Splittorff? We'll show you really quickly. The Royals had to get rid of Splittorff because they want to keep Amos Otis, UL Washington, who's very good in 82, Frank White, and Larry Gura. So Splittorff is the 5th wheel in this situation. And to make matters worse, when I looked at Splittorff's numbers, his body of work from 1979 to 1982 is pretty below average to average. His ERA is over 4 in every single one of those years. So no tokens involved. I made a note to make it 0. So sorry, Kansas City, I'm not going to give you a token, even though Splittorff is a lifetime Royal, I believe, because he didn't pitch that well. And Darryl Knowles, a wavered player, actually is good enough to be a keeper. They just pushed him on waivers. So someone will pick Knowles up off of waivers anyway. So no tokens involved in that. Now let's go look at Seattle first here. So they got Taveras as an upgrade over Bucky Dent. Again, they have Splittorff and Gaylord Perry joining Mike Parrott and Floyd Bannister. They could trade or kick Abbott in the bullpen. And they still have Al Oliver. His 78 card is up, and they can still trade it. But for right now, they're going to hold on to it. During this time, Al Oliver was sent to the Texas Rangers. So Seattle is like, I'm not going to send him to the Texas Rangers. Texas Rangers went out and got Bobby Bonds. So they got Mickey Rivers, Texas does, Bobby Bonds, and they also got Rusty Staub and Richie Zisk. So they don't really have room for Oliver. Though a Richie Zisk for Al Oliver trade would be pretty cool, since they both played for the Pirates. And because Zisk, I think, finished his career with Seattle, and Oliver, like I just said, played for Texas. So a lot of fun doing this stuff, just, you know, and still there's plenty of wiggle room to make more deals here, as we've only looked at half of the carousel, and this is just to comport to the 40202, you see. And we still need 6 keepers to move onto waivers, and a bunch of those waiver guys to go into retirement. So there's 6 more guys who are keepers, +1 on Houston, +1 on St. Louis, +1 on the Cubs, the Brewers, Las Vegas, +2 on Portland, +1 on Baltimore. They're not going to be able to keep those guys. So some of those good keepers are going to have to go on waivers soon. But that's it for this turn. When we resume, we'll take a look at the next 8 teams here, beginning with Houston, Detroit, Philadelphia, the Expos, the Cubs, the Brewers, Las Vegas, and those Yankees who traded for a Gossage and Dent that you saw. Thanks for checking this out. We'll see you next time.